Mr. President, on one other subject, I want to say a word about something I discussed last week. And I want to show you the photograph of a 22-year-old young man. His name is Efraim Diveroli. He's the CEO, yes, he's the president, of a firm that was awarded $300 million in taxpayer contracts to provide weapons to the Afghan fighters in Afghanistan. Our department, our State Department, our military, said the American taxpayers shall pay for weapons to be given to the Afghanis, the fighters in Afghanistan. Well, that's probably another debate, but one I think most people would say, if they're fighting for freedom in Afghanistan, let's help them. So we're going to help them by providing guns and bullets and other kinds of weapons. And a contract is given to a company in Miami, Florida that had been a shell company for some years. $300 million was given to that company. Turns out the company is run by a 22-year-old man named Efraim Diveroli. And by the way, his vice president was a massage therapist named David Packouz, a former masseur. And between the two of them, they got $300 million in taxpayer contracts. I'll tell you who gave it to them. The Army Sustainment Command did it. And I want the general in charge of the Army Sustainment Command to come to the Congress and explain, how do you give $300 million in contracts to what had been a shell company, now run by a 22-year-old and a 25-year-old massage therapist, who apparently has since quit the company, and in exchange for being granted immunity will talk to investigators. What did they do with the money? Well, the Afghan fighters, and I've got some photographs of it that, in fact, I'm going to see if we can get the photographs of what the product looks like that they provided the Afghan fighters. As I'm waiting for those charts, this is the building in Florida where the office of this company was that got $300 million. $300 million. Now, the office is just an office inside this building. No markings on the door. This 22-year-old president says he's the only employee at this point, but they got $300 million. Now, here's a sample of what showed up from that $300 million. They sent ammunition to the Afghan fighters that turns out in some cases to have been mid-1960s ammunition made in China. Almost worthless. But we paid the $300 million. Now, I mention this again, as I have so often, because 3 times I have offered on the floor of the Senate an amendment, and I will again, that would establish a Truman Committee to investigate waste, fraud, and abuse in this kind of contracting. We have shoveled more money out the door. We've sent pallets of $100 bills on C-130s, $18 billion in cash to Iraq. We have such unbelievable waste and fraud and abuse, I think the greatest in American history, and yet there is nothing that represents the kind of oversight that the American people should expect of us. 3 times I have offered the establishment of a Truman Committee. Let me describe what the Truman Committee was. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was in the White House at the time. Senator Truman from Missouri on the floor of the Senate. He proposed a bipartisan select committee to investigate waste, fraud, and abuse in the Pentagon. And it passed. They did 60 hearings a year for seven years. They were started with $15,000 appropriations, and they saved $15 billion for the American taxpayer. If ever we need that kind of a committee, it is now. 3 times I have offered that on the floor of the Senate. 3 times. Every vote on the Democratic side of the aisle has been to say, yes, we need it. Every vote, save 1, on the Republican side of the aisle objected and opposed. And we have not been able to get this done. I use this example because it was on the front page of the New York Times just last week about a company that gets $300 million that appears now to have been completely wasted, American taxpayers' dollars, once again just poured down a rat hole. I use this example to say we ought to be embarrassed to not have the kind of oversight that we should. And I'm proud to say that everyone on this side of the aisle has voted 3 times to establish a select bipartisan committee called the Truman Committee. We know this works. We've done it before. I've held up on the floor so many examples. A little white towel that Halliburton was ordering for the troops because they have the log cab contract to supply these things. A little white towel that their buyer, Henry Bunting, was ordered to buy for the troops. And so he orders the white towel. The supervisor says, "You can't do that. You need to order a white towel with KBR, our subsidiary, Kellogg Brown and Root, embroidered on the towel." Henry says, "Well, that'll triple or quadruple the cost." The supervisor says, "It doesn't matter. It's a cost-plus contract. The taxpayer will pay for that." I mean, that's a small example, and there are so many large examples. Whistleblowers have told us that $85,000 brand-new trucks are left beside the road to be torched because they didn't have a wrench to fix a flat tire. Doesn't matter. The American taxpayer bought those trucks, and they'll buy the replacement trucks on a cost-plus contract. It is unbelievable. A woman named Bonatine Greenhouse came to testify before the policy committee, which I chair, and I held almost all of the hearings that have been held on these issues. The policy committee doesn't have subpoena power, but you'd be surprised at how many whistleblowers want to talk about what's happening. Bonatine Greenhouse became the highest-ranking civilian official in the Corps of Engineers, judged to be outstanding by all accords. She said the awarding of these contracts in the Pentagon for reconstruction, the log cab contract, the Rio contract, all of these contracts, is the most blatant contracting abuse she has seen in her career. For that, this courageous woman was demoted. She paid for it with her job, but she would not be silenced. And now her career is behind a curtain over in the Pentagon. No one will comment. It's under investigation. This woman had the guts to come forward and describe this unbelievable waste, fraud, and abuse that's going on. The American people should not stand for this. We should not stand for it. And I intend again to offer the amendment that would establish a bipartisan committee to aggressively investigate waste, fraud, and abuse in contracting in Iraq, waste, fraud, and abuse in all of the other adjunct areas, because I believe the American taxpayer is getting fleeced, and I believe American soldiers are being disserved by what is happening. I mean, I can speak for hours about this subject because I've had somewhere around 15 or 17 hearings on this subject. I've had whistleblowers come to tell me that they were at a camp that was serving 5,000 soldiers a day food under the contract, but they were billing for 10,000 soldiers. I've seen the reports that Halliburton was billing for 42,000 meals a day and they were serving 14. They were overbilling by 28,000 meals. It's just unbelievable when you see the evidence of waste, fraud, and abuse and so little interest in pursuing it. Mr. President, there is much more to say about this, but I did want to say that the story in the New York Times yesterday ought to once again be a wake-up call. There is a commission that has been established, which is outside of this body, and the Senator from Virginia, Senator Webb, and Senator McCaskill and others have worked hard to establish the commission. And I think that is a step forward, evaluating and looking at waste, fraud, and abuse. But that is not, in my judgment, a substitute for, it certainly is a complement to, but not a substitute for, the Congress having its select committee with subpoena power. Without subpoena power and a select committee to investigate things like a company getting $200 million to rehabilitate 140 clinics, health clinics in Iraq. The money's gone. There are only 20 places that they've rehabilitated health clinics. Otherwise, the money's all gone. So what happened to the money? We had testimony from a very courageous Iraqi the other day who said $18 billion, mostly American money, has disappeared. At least disappeared within his eyesight, because he was in charge of corruption, anti-corruption in the Iraqi government. He was in charge of the anti-corruption unit in the Iraqi government. They tried to kill him 3 times. He finally left because he said the corruption was so unbelievable, and so he was so unable to stop it. He said $18 billion of American taxpayers' dollars, he believes, most of it American taxpayers' dollars, has been wasted. So, Mr. President, I'm going to later this week speak at greater length about the waste, fraud, and abuse issue, because we have to stop ignoring it. We have to start confronting it. I would say my colleague, Senator Reid, has been very strong and very assertive in wanting to address this. All of my colleagues on the Democratic side have voted 3 times to establish a Truman Committee. This war in Iraq has lasted longer than the Second World War. This amount of waste, fraud, and abuse is the greatest in the history of this country, I'm convinced. And we aren't near doing what we should to provide the oversight. And it's not the fault of this side of the aisle, not the fault of the majority leader. He has been aggressive, and so have we. We've offered it time and time and time again. And, Mr. President, we're not going to stop. The American taxpayer deserves better. Mr. President, I yield the floor. I make a point of order that a quorum is not present.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.